Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for the week starting Sunday, April 30th. Looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean, we see remnants of a gale tracking through the western Gulf of Alaska, and that is about it. The focus is progressively turning more towards the southern hemisphere. We start this week's tour looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales. When those gales do form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, that is a dip in the jet stream, and we really don't see anything. Though, given the time of year, we still see a rather healthy flow. That is, the jet is progressing off of Japan, building over the dateline. Winds, what is that, about 150 knots, but notice it is split here with the southern branch falling directly over Hawaii, a little bit of almost a trough here, helping support low pressure over the Hawaiian Islands, while the main flow pushes into Vancouver Island, that area. Really, though, no support for gale development is indicated, and that would be pretty typical given the time of year. Rolling forward, we just watched this same sort of pattern occur until about Tuesday night. Then a trough develops in the Gulf of Alaska, but rather weak, winds 130 knots. That should help support low pressure development, more than likely. But notice here also off the U.S. West Coast, a ridge. So in a trough, you get counterclockwise circulation aloft. That also manifests itself down at the surface. That is the indicator of low pressure. Low pressure, of course, generates wind. Wind generates seas, and seas generate swell as they radiate away from the fetch area. But not a whole lot of seas or swell is expected from this trough. And the other notion here is the ridge. That would support the opposite of low pressure, high pressure, clockwise circulation. That is high pressure, and that generates north winds along the California coast. Also, maybe hints of a trough off of Japan. Anyway, we'll roll this forward. Yes, the trough continues in the Gulf of Alaska. Winds building to 150 knots, but just the temperature dynamics are really not there. That would not do much for supporting any sort of significant gale development. Also, another trough developing, again, Wednesday night towards the dateline. Roll this out more. The trough in the Gulf pinches off by Thursday night. Friday, we have actually a pretty decent-looking trough here over the dateline. Maybe low pressure, maybe a gale would develop. Roll this out further. Winds start fading off by Friday night into Saturday. Things settle down. The jet generally, though cohesive, not very energetic. Notice this sort of cut-off low thing going off here off of California. Interesting. And the ridge here over Hawaii, so you'd have high pressure here, low pressure here. That theoretically could generate a gradient and a lot of north winds. We'll see how that progresses. And then notice cut-off low over, what is that, Southern California on Sunday night, 180 hours out. Hard to believe. If anything, maybe wind, probably no precipitation associated with it. Just guessing. High pressure off the coast, probably a wind machine relative to California. And then, but still, look at this. You go further to the west, a cohesive jet, not split, holding together pretty well. Not bad for early in May. Let's go take a look down at the surface. Here we go. Surface level pressure, surface level winds. Not a whole lot going on as expected. High pressure, 1028 millibars off the U.S. West Coast. Weak low over the Aleutians. No fetch of interest. Winds max 25 knots. No support for swell production. Roll this out. Now remember, we saw a trough forecast in the Gulf of Alaska. Here we go. Low pressure developing at the surface. A little bit of 30-knot winds by Tuesday morning. Building 35 knots into Tuesday night. And a little tiny patch of 40-knot winds. That's it. Again, all aimed mainly at Canada. Not a whole lot at the U.S. West Coast. You see high pressure trying to get going. A little bit of a gradient here. 25-knot winds. Very typical of this time of year. The low in the Gulf fades out by Wednesday night. Now remember, there was another trough towards the dateline. We see that starting to develop. Low pressure at the ocean surface. Building fetch of 40-knot winds by Thursday morning, continuing into 24 hours into Thursday night, and then fading out by Friday. High pressure moving towards the U.S. West Coast. We thought we saw a trough here. Low pressure inland, high pressure, the gradient. North winds start building. See if how that develops. Also, look at this. The low theoretically redeveloping a little bit in the western Gulf of Alaska, almost on the dateline, 30-knot winds. Not a whole lot there. Winds here building along California by Sunday, 30 to 35 knots, centered on the San Francisco area. Pretty raw, more than likely. Now, here you go. This is kind of rare. 35-knot north winds, theoretically, along Cape Mendocino, down to just off California. Sunday night, large, raw, local wind swell would be expected for Central California. And then mixing perhaps with swell that was coming from this system that was over towards the dateline earlier. We'll see what really happens. Roll this out to 180 hours, still 35-knot winds off Cape Mendocino come Monday morning. Interesting situation for the time of year. Wind swell, that's about all you can expect. So finally, let's take a look at the effect of those winds on the ocean surface. Currently, wave model, 19-foot seas towards the western Gulf of Alaska, otherwise a rather placid pattern. Roll this out, nothing going on. All that was remnants of a gale previously that pushed off Kamchatka, made it to the dateline on about the 50 north latitude. Seas were 22 feet, something like that. In fact, let's go take a look. And here we go. That gale pushed off Kamchatka late Friday. Seas built to 20 feet, small area. Pushing towards the dateline Saturday was that 22-foot seas max, basically effectively 21 feet. There we go. A little burst of real 22-foot seas on 18Z Saturday, and it makes it over the dateline Sunday and fades out. Not much expected from this. Maybe a tiny pulse of swell for Hawaii, and probably nothing for California. Whatever swell was generated, again, it'll only be maybe a 13-second period swell. That will decay significantly on the long journey from the dateline, 2,400 nautical miles. Whatever swell makes it to the U.S. West Coast will be buried in wind swell locally generated. So anyway, back to the forecast. We're at Monday night, almost Tuesday, and here comes the gale. Seas generated from the gale forecast for the northern Gulf. 20-foot seas, Tuesday night, 21-foot seas, let's say. Mainly aimed at Canada. Yeah, maybe some sideband energy into central California at best. Most of the focus would be the Pacific Northwest up into Canada. And then 20-foot, 26, 27-foot seas, but all aimed purely at Canada, not even into the Pacific Northwest. Not much to be expected. And that 90 hours out, you can't expect, can't believe the models there. But anyway, the second gale we saw, forecast for the dateline, small area, 20-foot seas, building to 24 feet Thursday night. Certainly some swell for Hawaii, just given their close proximity, though not really on the Great Circle paths. Still, it's just a distance function, not a whole lot for the U.S. West Coast. That gale fades out, though tries to hang on, but just not a lot going on. Now, notice this. This is interesting. Again, that fetch of northwest winds along Cape Mendocino down to San Francisco, up to it says 18-foot seas, maybe 19-foot seas, but given the extremely close proximity, no decay will occur. Large wind swell possible for Central California. Looking down south, hindcast. So we see an area of 27 plus foot seas right here. This is part of a gale that was broader under New Zealand up to 38, 39 foot seas, if I recall correctly. That swell is already hitting California. Should peak on Monday in Southern California and up into Central California. Should make for rideable 200-degree angle swell. Nothing huge, but any southern hemi swell is good this time of year. We'll take it. Anyway, just rolling out, looking at the rest of the week after that. This small gale developed beyond that Tuesday of last week. 32 to 33 foot seas, maybe yet, and pushing reasonably well to the northeast. Some small swell should result from that, but nothing too dramatic. And then one last tiny, very tiny, off the Ross Ice Shelf. And notice, this time of year, look at how suppressed the ice is. So you can get a gale pushing off of almost 70 or 65 south and get some seas out of that. As we get into June, July time frame, the ice is going to build solidly up to 65 south, well across the South Atlantic. You would get no swell if this system developed later in the season. Anyway, it's a tiny system, 30-foot seas, and then it pretty much faded out, and that's all there was. So, one swell in the water, two very small ones behind that. Should be good for swell, mainly focused on California and south into Central America and Peru and Chile through about Friday. And after that, things get very quiet. And then looking forward, the forecast from right now, 18Z Sunday on out 180 hours. You can just look at the models, see for yourself. Really nothing going on. Yeah, little bits of low pressure, seas 28, 29 feet, but nothing. You really want something pushing to the northeast that pushes up the Great Circle Pass towards California, Hawaii. None of that is forecast. Here, we'll just roll this out. You can see there's a pretty decent gale. It's falling to the southeast. Does nothing other than maybe for southern Chile, and that is it. We're 180 hours out. So the point being, swell in the water for California for the next through about Friday. After that, things get pretty quiet. So let's take a look long term. What's going on with the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, and ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. MJO, of course, is the cycle that pushes across the equator, generally in 3 to 4 weeks. Active phase, inactive phase. When it's active, it tends to support storm formation in the northern hemisphere in the winter months. And sometimes, but there's a much weaker correlation, let's say 50% of the correlation also helps support storm formation in the southern hemisphere. And of course, El Nino or La Nina can either help suppress storm formation or enhance it. Of course, El Nino is the preferred configuration. As usual, we start looking at winds in the Kelvin wave generation area. So this chart here, East Pacific here, West Pacific here, this is the equator. These are actual winds, 5-day average over the ocean based on TAO buoy array. That is, buoys set up in lines across the equator, set up to measure or monitor for the presence of El Nino. We see currently easterly winds, pretty brisk over the entire region, not unexpected this time of year, though weaker west of the date line. It is the Kelvin wave, here's the date line right here, it's the Kelvin wave generation area from 170 west, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. There's New Guinea there. This block right in here out to about 135 right in there. If you get the active phase of the MJO, you see trades. They'll just be weaker than normal. Sometimes they'll actually reverse and blow from the west, but that's not normal. That would only be in a strong El Nino. And so this chart here looks at anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year, and basically we see a neutral pattern over the entire equatorial Pacific till we get to the Kelvin wave generation area, and just right in here we see some westerly anomalies, suggesting perhaps, and this is a bit south of even 5 south, but still little tiny, we see trades neutral to light westerly or anomalies light westerly, suggesting perhaps that the active phase of the MJO is trying to set up. Looking at history, back starting the end of March, okay, this chart a little bit different, but the Kelvin wave generation area, basically between these two tick marks, right here's the date line. Here is, let's say, the Philippines, far west Pacific. And as going down in time, the blues are easterly anomalies, suggesting La Nina. The yellows and the reds are westerly anomalies. The tendency has been for easterly anomalies, this associated with La Nina, the fading remnants of La Nina. And notice, here is today's date, April 30th, and for the first time we actually have neutral to light westerly winds per this model, but the forecast is interesting. Over the next week, westerly anomalies to build in the Kelvin wave generation area. The first clear sign that La Nina is dead, the active phase of the MJO is trying to set up and getting some legs in the Kelvin wave generation area. This is a good sign. Looking at the forecast for the MJO, first off, we look at outgoing long wave radiation models. So basically, this is a model that shows the amount of sunlight reflectivity off the ocean surface. Blues are negative values, meaning less sunlight reflectivity, meaning clouds, meaning the active phase of the MJO, low pressure. Reds are, of course, more sunlight reflectivity, high pressure, meaning the inactive phase of the MJO. This model, the statistical model, suggests the active phase of the MJO is to fade out in 5 days, and a weak inactive phase is to move over the Kelvin wave generation area. Again, equator. Here we go. 130 east to about 170. Draw a box right in there. But the GEFS model, GFS ensemble model, basically suggests a static pattern with the active phase of the MJO holding for the next 2 weeks. Phase diagram charts, assume you're looking this circle right here, assume that's the North Pole of our planet, and the active phase of the MJO moves from west to east, from the Indian Ocean over the maritime continent, over the West Pacific, under the U.S. West Coast, across the Atlantic, on top of Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. The heavy dot is where the active phase of the MJO is, basically the Central Pacific. The forecast per this, the ECMF model, suggests it's to retrograde a little bit towards the West Pacific for a couple of days, and then move to the east over the Atlantic, and of no interest to the Pacific. But the GEFS model suggests basically the active phase is to hold solid in its current position for the next 2 weeks. That is the preferred outcome. Upper level models, much more mixed patterns suggested. It's hard to make sense. Basically, some sort of a weak active phase is indicated currently over the West Pacific, but just dying about a week out or so. And a inactive phase of the MJO. The reds are indicative of less precipitation. The greens, more precipitation. Some sort of inactive phase moving into the West Pacific. Let's say somewhere past the first week of May. But it, too, makes its way east and fades. Then a stronger active phase suggested towards later May, working its way off to the east and making it the whole way across the Pacific, followed by a very weak inactive phase. So just to put things in perspective, the MJO has been just exceedingly weak. A lot of it, you'd think even with La Nina that would enhance the inactive phase of the MJO, but even that hasn't happened. The MJO just has basically been dead. If the MJO is dead, then there's no real force in the atmosphere. There's nothing to either promote storm formation or to suppress it. You're just kind of in this netherland where nothing is happening. And that appears to be the case for now. There's some hints per this model that maybe the MJO will strengthen, but I don't really believe it. Now, the trusty CFS model, 850 millibar wind projections, that is winds up about 4,200 feet, which is a good approximation for what's going on at the surface. Now, this model, the way you look at it here, basically the Kelvin wave generation area is right in about here. Past history is down here, and you can see, we'll just go down here a bit. You can see blues are easterly anomalies, and that's what we've been dealing with since the beginning of the year. Basically a manifestation of La Nina, not unexpected. We knew this year was going to be a La Nina year. But notice when we got into about late March, April, the strong La Nina pattern started fading out, and now we're in this weak. The yellows are westerly anomalies. We'll just overlay this right here. There you go. You can see the MJO. The active phase of the MJO is fading over the Kelvin wave generation area, again, from, where is it, about here to here. And we're moving towards the inactive phase per this model. But notice, westerly anomalies are not only supposed to build, but build pretty strong, almost a westerly wind burst as we get into the first week of May. That is not attributable to the MJO, but is attributable to this, and a equatorial Rossby wave. We'll see a bit of a reach, but it's there. We'll take it if we can get it. Any westerly anomalies are good. Anyway, we get into this inactive phase of the MJO, and even at its peak, you don't get, you get a little bit of westerly and easterly anomalies, in the far west Pacific, but not too strong. And then you get into, here we go, come about, let's say mid-June, June 10th or so, not June 15th. And then another active phase of the MJO sets up with westerly anomalies forecast. Now, the interesting thing is this model a couple of weeks ago was suggesting very strong westerly anomalies. From about mid-May on, it has backed off significantly. Let's go take a look at the low-pass filter. That gives you a sense of what's going on. So here the dotted contours are La Nina. The solid contours El Nino. This is La Nina on the date line in the Kelvin wave generation area. This is the area that's supportive of storm or gale formation in the Indian Ocean. Classic La Nina kind of pattern. As we get into May 8th, May 10th, La Nina is officially supposed to be dead. And as we get into maybe the 24th of May, some sort of a weak El Nino pattern, or at least a pattern supportive of precipitation development in the Kelvin wave generation area, is to set up. This is what we've been waiting for. The dates of the stop of this, of the La Nina pattern and the start of the El Nino pattern are pretty much locked in. They've been holding for weeks now. This is good news. We're just waiting for it to happen. But the big difference is the strength of this supposed El Nino pattern is not nearly as strong as it was a couple of weeks ago. So we've talked about the MJO. Let's go talk a little bit about what's going on subsurface ocean dynamics. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. This is on the equator. We're looking down into the ocean along the equator. We're looking at the temperature gradient, the distribution of temperatures. Finally, 30-degree Celsius temperatures showing up in the far west Pacific. Heating pretty much confined to the far west Pacific. Cooling in the East Pacific, but not cooling from a trend, just cooler temperatures. The depth of the isotherm, the depth of warm temperatures, much shallower than in the West Pacific, but that is pretty much normal. But the key here is the 28-degree isotherm line was pretty much terminated right here at 175 west a week ago, or a little bit even before that. It made some significant progress east, backtracked, and now it is at 165 west. So that is way better than it has been for a year now, suggesting a little bit of relaxation. So if trades are nuking out of the east here, that'll push temperatures, bottle them up in the West Pacific. Trades have backed off a little bit is the thought, and so the temperatures are creeping off to the east, but not a lot. Likewise, we have pretty decent right here at 140 west, 24-degree temperatures reaching down to, well, about 80 meters or so. So things are looking a little bit better. Let's take a look at anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year. The picture looks even better. Yeah, we have heating in the west, 2 degrees above normal here in the West Pacific. Now, if you were trying to get a real El Nino going, you'd want to see a lot higher temperatures over here, maybe 4-degree anomalies. We don't see that. But what we don't see is cool water blocking the flow. So if you were to get any kind of a Kelvin wave westerly wind burst, whatever warmth is here, there is a open path to allow it to get to the east. And we see warm anomalies, 1-degree anomalies, almost 2-degree anomalies off of Central America here, easing off to the east. This pocket here, this is still 2 degrees below normal, but significantly smaller than a week ago. This is no longer a concern. The path is open, but the reality is there just isn't much warm water here to migrate to the east, even if you did have a bunch of westerly anomalies. So the setup, the ocean needs to recharge. There needs to be a lot more heat buildup in the ocean at depth if we were to have a significant El Nino develop. Here's a view from a different model, but it kind of shows the same thing. Warmth here was this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It says 2 to 3. The other model said about 2-degree anomalies here, close enough. This cool pocket has backed off. We think this is even a little bit exaggerated right here and further southward displaced. A little bit of warm water in the east. Most of this is from a die-off or a dying of trades that occurred a couple of weeks ago along South America. This is not attributable to significant Kelvin wave development at all. Upper ocean heat anomalies, upper 300 meters of the ocean surface, of course, back in May 2016. La Nina developed, cool water moving from west to east, held into about November, but this is a very weak La Nina. And then as we got into January 2017, temperatures pretty much got normal at the surface and upper 300 meters. Something that almost resembled a Kelvin wave occurred in March. We got some heating here off of Central America, but again, we think a lot of that was just attributable also to a dying of trades in that area, allowed the sun to warm up the ocean surface. A little bit of a cooling, one could say the upwelling phase of the Kelvin wave cycle. We're moving out of that now. Still, not a lot of baking temperatures in the West Pacific. Not much support for a El Nino development. And yet, one more way to look at this, sea level anomalies, strip out all the seas, strip out the chop, strip out the tides. This from the Jason-2 satellite, where you see bulges, that is yellows or reds, and we're really interested in just what's going on here on the equator. We see warming, weak warming, 5-10 centimeters max in the far west Pacific. That suggests warm water at depth. Warm water at depth, of course, expands, sort of creates a little bit of a bulge on the ocean surface. But in between here and the Galapagos and Ecuador, pretty much neutral, just nothing going on. Weak little bulge here, not even 5 centimeters off of South America, suggesting some sort of warming, but nothing particularly impressive. Ocean surface temperature anomalies. So, was it 3 weeks ago or so, we saw massive warming off of Peru and Chile, almost 4 degrees above normal. That in turn created a lot of condensation, significant flooding in the Peru area. But notice here, this right along the coast, upwelling, getting root, cooling things down a little bit. And that cooler temperatures from upwelling from southerly trades along Peru has actually pushed its way over the equator. Temperatures have mellowed out considerably. Now, note, the El Nino official monitoring area starts at 120 west and goes out to 170, so out there 5 degrees north and south of the equator. And yeah, we have warming in there, but it's relatively weak. There's a lot of variability that goes on in here. You can get warming, you can get cooling, and it sort of fluctuates all over the place, but until it actually propagates west of 120, it doesn't mean a whole lot. And right now, yeah, we saw some warming. It migrated to the west, but moderated significantly, and as of right now, it's just at best a very weak warming trend. Certainly good in that it suggests that La Nina is dead, but in terms of an El Nino forming, no, not really. No signs of it. And then the trend for the past 7 days, and you can see it here, actually cooling starting to set up along South America. This is new just today. It's been pretty much neutral along here, but now just very light cooling. And of course, we've seen this for the past week, cooling along Ecuador, out over the Galapagos, and out to 140 west. Hawaii is there, so not quite reaching to Hawaii. And that's not unexpected because it was baking warm in this region. So this cooling doesn't mean it's cold, just means it's cooling relative to what it was 5 or 6 days ago. It's returning to more of a normal to just lightly warm pattern. Still warming going on off of Mexico out to the dateline. No indication that cooling or La Nina is in control. And then looking at the big picture, we still see warming. So it's, little pockets of 1 or 2 degrees above normal. And warming, you can pretty much draw a triangle right out like this along here. And that's certainly not a La Nina sign. It's indications of maybe El Nino, but not warm enough to really be El Nino, just warmer than slightly warmer than normal. Also notice this warming coming off of California the whole way over Mexico into the Philippines. Maybe a hint of the warm phase of the PDO. Actual ocean temperatures, the Nino 1.2 region. So this is the region there right along the Galapagos, Ecuador, out to 120 west, not the El Nino official monitoring region. This is the very variable area. Right now, temperatures 0.2 of a degree above normal. Not a big deal. 2.39 to be specific. And then in the official El Nino monitoring region, the Nino 3.4 region, from 120 west out to 170, you can see this trend. You can draw a line through this. It's trending upward sort of half a degree, 0.58, almost to 0.6 of a degree above normal. So El Nino is officially anything more than a half a degree above normal for 3 consecutive 3-month periods. We're not there. So when did we get above half a degree? I'd say roughly late April. So we're a couple weeks into quote unquote an El Nino sort of region. So probably not an El Nino, but you know what? It's not La Nina. And it is slightly warmer than normal. This bodes well for this coming fall, but not strongly well, just something to monitor. So the forecast from the CFS model, again, so the Nino 3.4 region, here is North America, South America, Australia. Nino 3.4 region from 120 west, roughly, it's hard to see, but we'll say roughly, draw a box right along in here. In May, you see warm temperatures, the reds are warm. June, July, it sort of breaks up. August, September, and here we'll pull this down so you can see it. In October, and what you see is most of the warming out here towards the date line. Classic sort of a Modoki El Nino. If it was real El Nino, all the warming would be off South America. No, this is just very light warming, and the scale is the oranges are a half a degree. That's what we're seeing. So maybe a minimal weak Modoki El Nino for the fall of this year. It might do a little bit to help storm development, but not a whole lot. Certainly not a lot to do to help precipitation into the U.S. West Coast, but that is kind of where we're at. The model was much stronger, suggesting a eastward displaced El Nino a couple of weeks ago. That is all evaporated now, and we're down to just weak El Nino at best. That is kind of typical, though. We're in the spring unpredictability barrier. That happens. That's from about March 1st into the end of May. The models can be all over the place. It's really hard to get a handle on what's going on, but things are settling out now. We're getting into May, and not a strong El Nino expected. That was not ever in the cards anyway, given the lack of warm water in the West Pacific or in the Pacific in general. So this is actually looking like a better picture of what we can expect than anything we saw before. So we've talked about the MJO, we've talked about El Nino or La Nina. Let's see what the atmosphere is saying is actually going on. That's what counts. So we look at the Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. Negative numbers in the daily, prolonged string of negative numbers in the daily index suggests the active phase of the MJO. If it works its way into the 90-day average, then maybe you're talking El Nino. What we see right now, current value, minus 20.77, not too bad, but notice the numbers have been, or the index has been all over the place. We kind of had a pretty good run here, but that was attributable to a tropical wave over Tahiti or a tropical system, and now it's just kind of noise level. The 30-day running average down at minus 6.31, maybe suggestive of the active phase of the MJO. The 90-day running average minus 1.36, certainly not indicative of either El Nino or La Nina, which is basically neutral, and that's good. That's better than where we were under La Nina and where we've been for the past year. the ESPI index. So instead of using surface pressure, it uses precipitation, differences between north of Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. We're kind of wondering if there's not something messed up with this model, because it's been at minus 1.06 for a couple of weeks now, hasn't varied at all. I think we're going to write no and say, hey, is there something going on here? Because it's always been dynamic, changing every couple of days, hadn't changed in a couple of weeks, so we suspect something's going on here, but we'll give you the data just the same. Still suggests rather a dry pattern right in here, which would be expected there north, and so it means less precipitation than normal in here, which is still indicative of La Nina. But by this time, we think the atmosphere should have settled out and should just be in a neutral pattern. And then finally, the forecast for the Nino 3.4 region, sea surface temperature anomalies. Now, remember, this was showing temperatures up 1 degree or greater as we got into the fall. Again, we showed you the previous images suggesting a Madoki El Nino, and this is reflecting that as well. Currently, temperatures, this says about 0.65 or so. That's about right. Holding into July and then actually backing off down to half a degree or maybe even 0.4 or 0.45 degrees into October, working the way to half a degree above normal. Again, indicative of Madoki El Nino, weak El Nino. Nothing, if you want to call it El Nino at all, basically we're going to say basically a neutral pattern, trending towards the warm side, but not significantly warm. This is still good. You can get significant surf in the fall and winter months in this sort of a situation, and you can get some decent precipitation into California, but nothing over the top. So that's kind of where we're at. Things have backed off a bit, and not unexpected given that we're in the spring unpredictability zone. So for right now, North Pacific pretty much going to sleep. We're into spring. Yeah, there's a little system that just occurred and maybe another one or two forecast for the dateline into the northern Gulf, but no significant swell expected. Small swell at best. Wind swell is really the name of the game for California. Southern Hemi, one swell in the water, two very small ones behind that by about Friday of this week. Things to get very quiet on that front. Wind swell is going to be all that's going on. Longer term, well, La Nina is dead. The active phase of the MJO trying to build in, but not strong. Long-term forecast, probably a Madoki El Nino at best, or just a neutral pattern moving into the fall and winter months. Still, that's better than La Nina. We'll take it, and we'll see where we end up. So that's it for this week. We'll do this again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.